Let us now look at the religious norms in Mecca and Medina at the time of the Prophet. As previously noted, several religious traditions coexisted in Arabia at this time. Christian and Jewish communities were scattered throughout the region. There was substantial interaction between these people, particularly through trade. Consequently, there was a general awareness of religious difference and some understanding of their monotheistic teachings. By contrast, the Prophet's hometown of Mecca was largely pagan, or more precisely polytheistic, given the many deities housed in and around the Kaaba. Philip Hitti again, he goes on to say, the South Arabian cults with their astral features, ornate temples, elaborate ritual and sacrifices represent a later and high stage of development, a stage reached by sedentary society, whereas Bedouin religion was basically animistic. The striking contrast between oasis and desert gave him, that is the Bedouin, a definite conception of a specialized deity. By the time of the Prophet, religious observance seems to have been mainly a matter of striking bargains with the more powerful of these deities. Despite this, as the Quran itself testifies, the average polytheist would have recognized Allah as a higher God, even the supreme deity. The notion of placating this deity would have appeared consistent with the monotheistic beliefs of Jews and Christians. However, Muslim connotations of the word Allah clearly differed from its pre-Islamic acceptance. For Prophet Muhammad, Allah was the God of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and he deplored any link with idol worship or animism. So what was the Quranic perspective on this worldview, replete with unappeasable deities, primitive superstition, and polytheistic legends and myths? What was the Quran's position on the power of the images with no visible impact on the moral life of worshippers? It is notable that many of the narratives, norms and values associated with pagan practice are clearly mentioned in the Quran. There are references to familiar figures, that is the deities, Wad, the moon god, and idols such as Suwa, Yaghuth, and Ya'uq. You can see this in chapter 71 of the Quran. There are also numerous references to the people and the narratives of the Christian Bible. The effect of this engagement with current ideas and practices in the Quran is to emphasize the oneness of Allah, as opposed to multiple deities. The Quran speaks of the obligation to worship the one true God. It warns of a future day of reckoning and judgment. An early Quranic verse delivers a stern, uncompromising message in highly poetic language. When the sky is torn apart, when the stars are scattered, when the seas burst forth, when graves turn inside out, each soul will know what it has done and what it has left undone. Mankind, what has lured you away from God, your generous Lord who created you, shaped you, proportioned you, in whatever form He chose, yet you still take the judgment to be a lie. Let us look at the Prophet Muhammad as a leader and reformer who migrates to Medina. You will recall that at the age of 40, Muhammad had experienced a religious vision or revelation while meditating in a cave near Mecca. Gradually, he accepted that he was, in fact, a prophet of God, entrusted with communicating God's revelation to his people. One early Quranic revelation calls upon people to reflect on the splendor of creation and the majesty of its creator. Exalted is he who holds all control in his hands, who has power over all things, who created death and life to test you, meaning people, and reveal which of you performs best. He is the mighty, the forgiving, who created the seven heavens one above the other. You will not see any flaw in what the Lord of mercy creates. Look around you. Can you see any flaw? Such verses about God were balanced by practical guidelines regarding a new social order, where a universal moral code would transcend mere tribal loyalty. The Quranic vision of a compassionate society was one where humility was valued over arrogance, and the rich and powerful cared for the weak and needy. Another Quranic text, which is chapter 19, verses 11 to 14, reads, "What will explain to you what the steep path is? It is to free a slave, or to feed at a time of hunger an orphaned relative or a poor person in distress, and to be one of those who believe and urge one another to steadfastness and compassion." Unsurprisingly, Prophet Muhammad began to attract the antagonism of powerful Meccan elders, the tribal elders, and they made many attempts to marginalize him. They played all sorts of tricks to force him to abandon his preaching. One can imagine the suspicion, resentment, and pressure put on him to conform. He was persecuted. His followers were heavily persecuted by the Meccans. But still, his message attracted followers. He and his followers had an extremely difficult time. Religious reformers throughout human history have tended to evoke the anxiety of entrenched elites, Jesus being an obvious case in point. Then, as the situation worsened, a group of recent converts to Islam from Medina in the north suggested an alternative. They offered to support and enable Prophet Muhammad to settle in Medina. This is not only because they respected his religious leadership, they also identified the quietly charismatic Muhammad as a potential arbiter in any of their own future conflicts. This move to Medina in 622 of the Common Era became known as the migration, or in Arabic hijrah. The Muslim community later decided to begin the Islamic calendar with that year. 622 equals year 1 of the Islamic calendar, which is based on the movement of the moon. In your readings, when dates are given as AH, it refers to the Islamic calendar. AD or CE refers to the calendar we use commonly. It refers to the Common Era or the Christian calendar. Medinan social history that strikes a student of this period is the extraordinary quality of Prophet Muhammad's leadership. This was political as well as religious, as these roles tended to overlap. Indeed, how could it be otherwise? This was a small Arabian settlement located near a key oasis. at the very juncture where trade, foreign ideas, and imperial interests converged. Almost every aspect of life was, or soon became, political. And Prophet Muhammad, after all, was by nature a reformer. He had a total view of reform. When problems arose, he would wait for the angelic voice and Quranic revelation. Under such guidance, he continued to lead until his death in 632, which is year 11 of the Islamic calendar.